Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to have two previous guests of the podcast, actually, but joining forces today. I'm going to have Robin Schneider, who's the director of marketing over at Green Cubes Technology, and Damon Hosmer, who is the managing director and general manager at Energy Storage Solutions for the Raymond Corporation. And they're going to be joining forces today as part of our MHI Industry Group series, and they're going to be talking about the Advanced Energy Council, also known as AEC for short. And they're going to tell us a little bit about that. They're going to tell us who's involved in that as a fairly new industry group for MHI. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and what kind of spurred the creation of this, and just talk about the energy sector of the industry, material handling industry overall, and kind of what's going on today and kind of what the future looks like. So, Damon and Robin, it's great to see you both. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having us, Kevin. These are always really fun, and I just wanted to let you know I got really positive feedback about your podcast, so thanks for having us.
Okay. Well, we always love to hear that. I appreciate that. Definitely, definitely. So it's great to talk to you both again. Always enjoy the time talking to you, and love the battery talk too as well here. But why don't you kind of, I guess, Robin, why don't you kick us off here? Tell us a little bit about what is the Advanced Energy Council, and what it is that you're all about.
So, for people who aren't familiar, the MHI hosts industry groups. There are a bunch of them, of which the Advanced Energy Council is one. Our member companies and individuals, well, it consists of member companies and the individuals who represent them. And then, in addition to um, me and Damon, we have on our leadership team representatives from other industrial truck OEMs, battery and charger companies. Um, so it's really about looking at advanced energy in terms of like lithium-ion batteries. We have some of the lead acid battery vendors representing TPPL and making sure that everything works seamlessly together, and also the end users and enterprise customers have the tools they need to make good decisions. So we're providing things like um, standard guidelines for operation and how the truck integration works and they talk together and things like that.
Mm, very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that very important to create some awareness around that, and, help the end user end up with the right fit at the end of the day. So great kind of summary there and an overlook of, what AEC, the Advanced Energy Council, is all about. And now, Damon, why don't you kind of tell us what different types of parties are involved in the council, and who's the council really kind of serve at the end of the day too?
Yeah, so I'll ask Robin to keep me whole here, but it's made up of roughly 22 organizations, really brought together, like she said, to collaborate and address key energy challenges, promoting sustainability and really driving the adoption of the advanced technologies such as hydrogen fuel cells, lithium, all the things that she just mentioned within that kind of material handling and supply chain operations ecosystem, if you will. I think it's unique because, right, it's an opportunity for, right, folks that may compete on a day-to-day basis. There's partnerships involved, but it's really bringing together those industry experts, right, manufacturers, suppliers, and the goal is to educate end users around those best practices, like she said, right? How can we influence standards from that perspective? Because there's a lot of gray area with regards to integration and other components of the vehicle systems and stuff. And then how do we ultimately do what's best for the customer, right? As an educational perspective from the marketplace, because there's so many different, right, chemistries and focuses and everything. And I'll give you a couple other examples, right? In the last meeting that we had back in, I believe it was May of this year in Charlotte, right? We had a few organizations focused on carbon credit aggregation, right? So something that's kind of outside of the four walls of the warehouse and stuff, but has a grave impact to that financial bottom line. The group's been really good too, as well as bringing in recycling and feedstock organizations, right, that are focused on content for the group to help promote that circular economy mindset as we look forward and stuff. So I think it's neat because we're always looking to grow. Energy doesn't just play a piece in the manual side of the business, right? So,
Yeah.
I'll put a little bit of a selfish, recruiting note out to the group and stuff, but we're always looking for folks in the automation space, right? AMR providers, right? New technologies that are looking at things a little bit differently in that automated space. Because again, it comes back to a singular ecosystem from a customer perspective.
Hmm. Very interesting. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's interesting too, looking at that, kind of full ecosystem in a sense, right? We talked about, the carbon offset there, and even though that's not, directly happening in the building, and I mean, I guess in a way it is in a sense, but not something that's like tangible. You don't see like this, as when you look at the battery or something like that. But you know, bringing those together and then helping industry players, work on that, and then also being able to see that and bring that to the end user and then create that awareness around that too. I think is such an important thing as well. So it's great to hear that you guys are able to kind of come together and maybe put the competition down for a little bit and kind of collaborate to move the industry as a whole forward, which I think is really interesting there. And now the AAC, my understanding is that when I was doing some research here, is that it's fairly new, just formed and created in 2023. So I'm curious, Robin, what was kind of the catalyst to form this industry group, and why now, I guess?
Yeah. So, um, the official formation was in 2023, but we've actually been meeting for a few years before that. So, there's a process to initiate a new group into this MHI, um, uh, to make it official, I guess. So there were sort of unofficial meetings going on before that. Um, I believe we had started talking to Christian Dow, who's the executive vice president at MHI since about 2020. Um, but what happened was some of the lithium ion vendors sort of recognized a gap in an industry group. So there's the ITA, the Industrial Truck Association, which does a lot of this work at the truck level, and then there's BCI that exists for the lead acid, community, but there's a real gap for, um, lithium-ion, high-efficiency chargers, wireless charging, and all of that kind of thing, all of those sorts of things that are relatively new. So we kind of all got together and decided that we would fill that gap with the Advanced Energy Council. Um, and it really reflects that these types of technology, and I'll call out lithium ion in particular, but hydrogen would be included in also. Um, those types of technology have gone from sort of the infancy, early adopter stage to being a pretty widespread and well accepted technology that, is considered a very viable option. And it's much more mature than it was, say, even 5 years ago. So that's really why the timing is as it is. Damon, do you want to add any color?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, right? It's rapid evolution in the space that's coming very quickly, right? And I'll just speak from an OEM perspective, right? Without the support of that full ecosystem, like we described, right? Some people move at glacial speeds, right? They get kind of paralyzed with looking at all the different technologies, and it's overwhelming, right? Because everybody's kind of speaking a different value proposition to you with regards to the chemistry or whatever it may be. So I like the idea of the catalyst really being right. It gives us a platform to bring data, not bias, as a whole, right, with a group together that can really unify that kind of one voice, and then again, right, advocate for the other organizations like we talked about, ITA and BCI and stuff, to really help us kind of evolve the standards and look at things differently, right, as mechanical and data integration become a such a huge part of the ecosystem again, like I said. So I think Robin did a really eloquent job of kind of keying it up, but I would say it's just moving so fast, right? We need everybody to kind of keep each other whole, right? And make sure that we're on top of it to best support those end users and customer base.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting and, interesting to learn that, like BCI, you said, is focused on the lead acid side, right? And now we're seeing all these other types of energies, like Robin, you mentioned hydrogen in there and TPPL and lithium ion. So I'm curious actually from that, because it's not the Energy Council, right? It's the Advanced Energy Council. So I guess tell us a little bit about either one of you, whichever one you wants to take this, but what is advanced energy? Like, what does that define specifically?
That we had a lot of debate about the name of the green. So I think what it means is just basically we're kind of open to anyone who would consider themselves to be advanced. So it's a kind of self-identifying label, but to me what it means is anything that has been adopted in this industry recently, right? Because even lithium ions like not really that new. It was invented in the 80s. But it's only been adopted in the material handling world in the last I know we first shipped our first material handling battery, almost exactly 11 years ago, and we were really one of the first. So, you know, most almost all of this technology is stuff that has basically been adopted within the last it's gained steam in the last 5 years or so.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, yeah. I was curious about that, and especially then when you pointed out that, oh, there's BCI too, which so I was curious like what kind of fell into that. And I think that's interesting that you're kind of leaving it open to the self-identification there, which I think is very cool too, because now you think about 4 years from now, 5 years from now, like there could be like another alternative potentially too that could end up falling in that category. So I guess tell us a little bit, and maybe Damon, you want to kick this one off here. I mean, you mentioned there that you guys have been meeting for a few years now, and the official, I guess, culmination of AAC kind of came around in 2023. But obviously, if you've been meeting for a few years, there's certainly been some stuff going on in the energy side of the material handling industry that felt the need to kind of spur these meetings and get a group together to talk about some of these things. So tell us a little bit about kind of the evolution of energy in the material handling industry and what that's looked like over the last few years and even kind of what does it look like today as we're talking now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the landscape has, evolved significantly, as Robin kind of mentioned. And, when you start to think about some of the sustainability goals, right, the technological advancements, all the different things that right, what truly means advanced, from our side, right, hydrogen fuel cell adoption, lithium ion battery adoption, right? That's one thing to kind of pull out the lead and put in the real estate, right? But when you start to look at control architecture, when you start to look at integration with data and energy management solutions, right, from a telematics perspective, when you look at the different charging technologies, right, like Robin mentioned earlier, we have manual connections that have kind of been in place, right, for the past 100 years. It started off with fluorescent and silicone rectified, technology, and then you've seen a migration to the high frequency, more power module driven type technology and stuff. And now customers are saying, what's taking place right behind the meter? How can we become more efficient at the facility level in a lot of different ways, right? Because they're scrutinizing that energy spend, especially in like the cold storage side of the business, right, with all the dynamics playing there. So I think it's interesting because there's so many complexities along with it, and for the longest time, right, was us working together and discussing on the front end of these conversations, right? How do we best work together, right? What are the third party policies in order to be able to be qualified by one of the end OEMs for said technology, right? From the OEM side, right, there's certain requirements like UL that we have from a vehicle perspective that a lot of customers require and stuff. So it's not let out lithium or hydrogen and then you're still right keeping all that reciprocity from the other certifications associated. ANSI, B56, kind of the ITA stuff, standards. There's been some gray space at the beginning of this, right? So watching them catch up and advance the standards within the industry and the requirements from an OEM perspective to protect our customers, right? Because think about it, right? Everybody's been so used to lead acid for years, right? Through that discharge cycle, you kind of had that brownout, and you get a good sense of when you need to go back and charge, right? From that voltage sensing kind of technology. Now think about these new technologies with a linear power band, no different than your cell phone, right? You've got a system that's man up VNA in a cold storage application, right? And that instantaneous power loss, you've got somebody stranded in the air, right? Will it safely lower it in an effective way? How do we, right, rescue the vehicle and or, right, mitigate some sort of other incident, right, if it was traveling and that was to happen?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of safety factors and stuff. I think safety always comes back to, right, the core of everything that MHI and most of everybody that's involved, focuses on. So safety's really given us a platform to learn, grow, and then again, provide that kind of education moving forward.
Yeah, I think safety is really, really important, and that's something that we've become very focused on. I think it's also important to recognize that people are adopting these technologies not just because they're sustainable and not just because in some ways, like, le lead acid batteries are not very safe when they're like a flooded lead acid battery that you have to water. There's all kinds of safety precautions that need to go around that. So in some ways, these new technologies have the potential to be safer, and you're not just ensuring safety, right? Um, but I think it's also really important to recognize that as we've moved from an early adopter type of um, buying persona for these types of technologies to a more mature enterprise customer, they're really evaluating things like the total cost of ownership. And they're not just doing it because of some kind of sustainability goal. Like, even if you look at um, like the metering that needs to go on behind the wall, as Damon mentioned, they're not doing that just because they have some green initiative. They're doing it because it saves them money, right? So we really see people kind of evolving and going through these like really detailed calculations to understand what is going to have the best total cost of ownership for them. And people are seeing a real ROI from these new technologies too. And we see that with these large enterprise customers who are implementing our technologies.
Yeah. And the only other comment that I'd make, Kevin and Robin, is, a lot of it's downstream effect as well, right? Think about just beneficial electrification as a whole, right?
Mm.
Everything that's taking place at the ports, right? And the way that commerce is moved from ship to, right, person to, retail or whatever it may be. So a lot of those same things, going back to the sustainability piece, right, are challenging folks to adopt and look at these new technologies. But it's because of, right, that upstream kind of effect that's taking place. So it's interesting to see the dynamics there, right? When you look at a public institution versus some of the privatized, right, big players in the marketplace and their strategies, right? Everybody's kind of trying to accomplish the same thing, but they all have different methodologies at which they're trying to apply the technology, if you will.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to see kind of this shift a little bit and see how, something like lithium ion, for example, is gain more adoption and the market growth there. And it's been interesting too to learn from you both, because I think, both of you, we've kind of talked almost like every year at some point about what's going on right now in energy, right? So it's been interesting to see that evolution, and you certainly see the shift happening, I think, and more people. And I talked to a company I used to work for, and the facilities guy that used to work for me, and he was telling me like, oh, now they're starting to look at lithium ion too, and what does that mean to switch over and all these things. And I think there's a lot of benefits there. Obviously, safety being one of them, huge. And I like Robin, you said it's safer in a sense, not just about making sure they're being safe around this equipment and the solutions, but just creating them to be safer from the get-go, which I think is really important there. So very interesting stuff on the evolution there. And now, as we talk about that evolution, and I think there's been things that have been changing, and you guys mentioned like different chemistries and things of that nature. But when we look at the energy side of the material handling industry right now, I mean, what are some of the innovations that are happening right now? What should people be aware of, and what's kind of most exciting too, I guess, for the both of you?
I think that the most exciting thing is that, um, we are seeing such a huge increase in US manufacturing, and not just the manufacturing of, like, material handling batteries, but also at the cell level and even the mineral acquisition, right? Like, there was a big announcement from the US Geological Survey, maybe just a few days ago that they discovered this huge lithium deposit underneath Oklahoma. And it's apparently enough lithium for the US to be completely self-sustaining in terms of lithium manufacturing. And so I think that that whole thing is really exciting for us as a country, um, to be really it moves us towards energy independence, and I think that's really exciting.
Hmm, interesting. What do you think, David?
I I get excited about the facility level stuff, right? Decentralized energy and microgrid conversations that we're having, not only at our own factories, but with customers that are right seeking kind of independence and just energy security in some of these disparate, areas that we're seeing facilities go up. You don't see a lot of green fields still going up in these major metropolitan areas right now. It's on the outskirts and it's matriculating to new spots that may not have, right, that service. So there's a lot of questions on, right, sustaining operation, meeting those sustainability goals, and then, right, really kind of coupling different renewable technologies together based upon geographic location and how they tie that into, right, ultimately the four walls of the warehouse. So, uh, again, I like to look at the connected kind of ecosystem piece because things are becoming more and more data driven, and there are tools, platforms, and softwares that just amaze me on a daily basis on the ability to aggregate and provide actionable value back to a customer. That's what gets me excited.
Yeah, I mean, people are probably we're all seeing, like, software evolution in terms of AI and all of that stuff, but you see that kind of at the nitty-gritty, at the battery level. So, like, instead of doing using firmware to measure state of charge, are seeing an evolution to use software for state of charge. So even at the very, like, nuts and bolts level, you're seeing that kind of evolution that Damon's talking about too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting to see that, and it's super interesting too about the Oklahoma, discovery there. I hadn't heard that, so that's interesting news there for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see, at a facility level too, like you mentioned there, Damon, just, how, and I'm in New Jersey here, right? So obviously very densely populated, tons of warehouses all around, right? But even, in those densely populated pockets where traditionally all the warehouses have kind of been centrally located in North Jersey and then Central Jersey, now like where I live and where I grew up is all farmlands, but now those farms are becoming warehouses essentially, right? But you see kind of that push out, right, further into these areas where there's not as much, infrastructure, or the infrastructure is a little older and dated, and, how are they navigating kind of some of these energy challenges, and especially as we see, more equipment going into these facilities to be able to process with higher throughput and more, overall volume just in general, like, how do you support all that? So, I'm curious from that aspect. I mean, what do you see for customers as either they're in a brownfield setting or they're going into a greenfield setting? I mean, are they taking like a slow transition approach from one energy solution to another? Are they going all in on lithium or TPPL? I mean, how are they navigating this and approaching this? And I guess what's your recommendation there as well to for somebody that's looking to take on one of these advanced energy solutions?
I'd say first and foremost, right, do your homework. Brownfield always creates, right, limitations. We all know that. You know, so many people talk about, I always think back to the let out lithium end piece, right? You've got 200 trucks in a big, right, New Jersey
Yeah.
e-commerce distribution facility. You've got 30 amp breakers across, right, your entire charging platform and stuff. You pull that out, you put lithium in, you move to like 400 plus amps on a charging setup, and all of a sudden your infrastructure is inadequate to support that right requirement. So you're causing problems if you're not careful on how you go in and right really quantify those consumption economics and help them look at things. What I would say is it's interesting. Brownfield sites, we're seeing a lot of folks incorporate renewables into existing buildings, right? Maybe if there's a roof replacement, or in Pennsylvania, right, Massachusetts, we've seen some wind type setups be put to supplement some of that on-site generation, and tie that back into it. You know, we've seen companies exploring solar power charging stations, kinetic recovery systems. I mean, you name it, and our customers are bringing kind of things that are outside of a lot of our core competencies in many ways and stuff. But there's so many different programs, right, from a utility or state or federal level that you can, number one, get money on the front end, right, and seek out what those incentives are within the local area, and then really understand, right, how that helps you achieve your goal, I think is a big thing. The greenfield sites, I mean, they blow my mind, Kev. I mean, honestly, some of these conversations that we have with some of the big developers around hybrid systems and campuses, you know, a Prologis, a Jungling, LaSalle, they approach us from a consulting perspective in a lot of scenarios, and they'll be building out, right, 8 to 10 of those spec warehouses in the old farmlands, and right, there's limited power coming in. So, hey, should we look at electrolysis, right? We are having conversations with folks that, from a generation perspective, are using hydrogen to ultimately power lithium-ion forklifts within the four walls of their warehouse. So these hybrid systems that are coming up, right, to drive that resiliency. And, you know, I think, not to be grim, but, you know, another piece that's being evaluated, especially in the greenfield sites and stuff, or right on the heels of COVID and everything else, lots of people are starting to put mitigation plans in place if there was another black swan type event, right? So how could they essentially still be able to take advantage, move commerce in a situation like that, independent of the grid, right? Because there's so much speculation about that could be, you know, one of those potential events down the road and stuff. So I think it's unique, right? That security piece and resiliency is something that's being evaluated in different ways, but the thought process on a greenfield site versus a brownfield site, just I'm shocked in some of these conversations I walk into and get to be a part of, right? It's pretty awesome. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting.
Robin, yeah.
Yeah, your comment made me think of something that is another really important thing about the Advanced Energy Council is that because we're inclusive of different types of technologies like, um, lithium ion and hydrogen, and those are being used by the they're not really competing with each other necessarily. They're being used as complementary technologies. And that's one of the reasons it's so important that we all get together and talk to each other because we shouldn't be just treating them as competing technologies when the end user is looking at them as something that can complement each other, actually work together to get a more holistic solution.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting there because I think it is, such a so many different things happening around energy in general, in a sense, and so many different interesting approaches to take to it. I know I've had some conversations on the podcast before, some people about like microgrid setups and things of that nature, and it's really interesting. Like you said, David, see some of these greenfield projects and how they're going about them, and just in general facility design and how they're thinking about having them be self-sustaining in some way to be able to handle things like that. Like you said, contingency plans, right, has become more and more important. And I think the reliability or on the regular grid, like I think some people are trying to navigate that and say like, oh, well, how do we make ourselves like self-dependent, right, to be able to do our own thing. And I think it's really interesting to see how that continues to evolve. And I think it's great that you guys are having these conversations as the Advanced Energy Council, not only about what's going on with the forklift and how's the forklift moving, but then on the holistic approach, like how are we actually getting all that power into the just the battery itself to be able to power that forklift. I think that's really great. No.
Yeah. One thing that we haven't talked about, that I would like to get Damon's feedback on too, is, um, we had a large enterprise customer who rapidly went from lead to lithium, 200 5 is 5 sites and I think 200 trucks, all within, like, a 4-month period. Really big project, and this customer, actually did a lecture recently showing the improved total cost of ownership. But one thing that she brought up that was really, interesting that I think doesn't get talked about very much is that the employee satisfaction was higher, because the, um, the forklift operators prefer these advanced technologies, and their union was, like, really, really happy with this implementation. So that's something I think we don't talk about very much, but I think it's a kind of interesting point.
No, I think, you bring a very valid point. The consumer feel, right, is so many of the operators, right, and the new folks going into these logistical operations, right, they may drive a Nissan Leaf into work, right, so they expect an automotive style connector on a forklift versus what traditionally is there, right, so, advancing those pieces, there's so many things. I think that's a great thing, and, right, you always hear customers say, right, a happy operator is a productive operator. So anytime we can make them happy and productive, right, customers really win, I think, in those scenarios. So good point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that user experience is becoming so much more important, not only from like typically you talk about user experience, you're thinking about software, but the hardware experience too, and like the physical experience too is incredibly important as well. And some of these advanced energy solutions are just they're just less messy, right, than lead acid in it, to put it in it's a very simple way. But I think it is that. And you see, you mentioned the Nissan Leaf, and similar kind of plug-in charging aspect in that way. And I see here, like when they're building new buildings, they're putting in car chargers in the parking lot of these warehouses, and so it is becoming more natural for that. And I think translating that into the work environment, just makes so much more sense. So really interesting stuff with you here, Damon and Robin. Really appreciate what you're doing with the Advanced Energy Council and how it's kind of creating this awareness around all of this energy, all the energy happenings around the facility and the building there, and kind of bringing to light and creating that awareness for the end user of what's possible, and figuring out together as a whole, as an industry, how to continue to move that forward and make things better for the end user at the end of the day. So really appreciate you joining me today. And if people are interested in learning more about the Advanced Energy Council, what's the best way to do that?
I think the best way is to go to mhi.org, and look at the website. There's a pretty thorough, um, web page for the Advanced Energy Council, with a bunch of backup information, past podcasts, that sort of thing.
All right, great.
And please join. That is my parting word.
Definitely join. Yes. So we definitely appreciate that. And we'll put all that information at thenewarehouse.com as well as in the show notes, so people can easily find and navigate to the council itself. And we'll be looking forward to seeing how you all continue to advance the energy in our industry. All right. So thank you very much, Damon and Robin, for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
Appreciate all this, Kevin.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.